Steven, why should people listen to this episode of Pod Friends featuring you, Steven Fishback?
Because you'll hear what an amazing interviewer Matt Scott is.
Damn it.
Sorry, buddy. That's what you're getting. That's what you're getting.
Hey Pod Friends, this is Mark Levy. I'm a diehard fan of Pod Friends. Maybe the biggest fan online, we don't know. But I do know this, that I have loved listening to every episode of Pod Friends. I love learning about people, and I love listening to Matt just connect with people in ways that I love to connect with people. I thank you for so much for what you're doing, Matt. It's great. I cannot wait for more seasons and more episodes, making more Pod Friends. Maybe make me the official Pod Friends mascot. I don't know. All I know is this. Thank you for what you do. It's much appreciated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the season finale edition of Pod Friends. I am your official Pod Friends, Matt Scott. Matt Scott. It didn't work. See, get it? Like Matt Scott, mascot. It took me way too long to realize that that was a thing and that the word sounded alike. And speaking of being alike, I have been thrilled to have so many conversations this season for Pod Friends with people and just to like bond with them and get to know them. And actually, just a little peek behind the curtain, I was not planning on recording my introduction right now. And I listened to voicemails that I received over the last several weeks, and you can leave a voicemail if you want, speakpipe.com/podfriends. You just heard from Mark Levy, who left a voicemail asking to be the Pod Friends mascot, and at the end of this episode, I'm going to include a handful more voicemails just because when I listen to them to hear what Pod Friends means to a number of folks in the community who you'll hear from in those voicemails, It actually, I'm not a big crier, just to be honest and vulnerable and real for a minute. I'm not a big crier, but it really hit home that, like, you know, I'm having these conversations and I'm so thankful. And I loved my conversation with Steven, for instance. And we talked about so much. We talked about his life growing up and where he was before Survivor. We talked a little about Survivor and his career and writing and the creative process and all of that. But I'm just so thankful to have these conversations with everyone in this Rob Has a Podcast community, whether they're a podcaster and someone we know and love it, or someone who we're just getting to know. I'm so thankful to have these conversations and hearing from people with what this means to them. And, more specifically, just hearing some of the mentions of things that you'll hear at the very end of this episode in the voicemails. It's really meant a lot to me. And I just want you all to know that I'm very thankful to be able to have this place in RHAP to uplift and celebrate the community. And yes, it's about the people in it, but the people who make the community and contribute to who we are. And it's not just talking about shows, but it's really like coming together and bonding. And as Steven talks about in this episode, it's really outgrown even the shows like Survivor Know-It-Alls, which he hosts, and a number of the others. And I love it. And I'm thankful to be here, and I'm thankful especially that you're here. So if you want to be part of it, or at least just let me know how you feel, because this is the season finale, you could leave a voicemail, speakpipe.com/podfriends. You could email me, podfriends@robhasawebsite.com. You could tweet me on social media at Hey Pod Friends or at Matt Scott GW, where you could always find me tweeting, sharing updates, sharing whatever I'm up to. And I'm just, again, so grateful for you all as the community, especially as we approach this season finale and the current Survivor season, which, of course, Rob as a podcast will be covering it extensively. It's already started. So the work is going, and you will hear from Steven each and every week as know-it-alls with Steven and Rob Cesternino rolls out and continues covering Survivor. But before anything else, if you are a Podfriends listener, I was gonna say a Podfriends lover, but that could be misconstrued. But if you're a Podfriends listener and love what this is and love the community, and you want to be even more a part of it, one of the big things I would suggest, something that I've done too, is to become an RHAP, RHAP is a Podcast Network patron. It supports shows like Podfriends that I could keep coming back and keep doing this. And hopefully I have another season coming up in the Survivor off season after Survivor 43 is over. So stay tuned for more of that. And again, follow at Hey Podfriends on social media, but become an RHAP patron because you could stay connected and really build so many meaningful bonds. There are live events coming up. I'll be at an upcoming live event. Again, become a patron, robhiswebsite.com/Patreon, because this community is really one of a kind. And I'm just so grateful for all of you for creating space for me within this community and for one another. And I'm glad that we're all in this together, right? And so I don't have much more to say. Just as the season concludes, please leave a review. I think if the voicemails and listening to them and my reaction, just like listening and crying and being like, oh my God, I need to just record my intro right now. If that was any indication, just the reviews and knowing how this hits you and where this lands with you, whether it's a review and you leaving 5 stars, or whether it's you sending in a voicemail, whether it's you sending an email, whether it's you tweeting about something from the episode that resonated. That's what this is about. And I really hope that for this very special episode with Steven, who, this is my first time talking with Steven and getting to know him. I really hope that there are things that you love and can share with your networking community, because sharing is caring, and that's what Podfriends do. So tell your friends to listen and subscribe. robhiswebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. And without further ado, let me introduce my guest and yours, the one and only Steven Fishback. Making his way to the podcast, hailing from Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, California, by way of New York City, Tocantins, and Cambodia, he is the Survivor legend, a fiction writer, a speechwriter, a media consultant, a dad. The list goes on. He is the host of Survivor Know-It-Alls with Rob Cesternino and the host of the Paraphrase podcast. Give it up for the one, the only, your pod friend and mine. Please welcome Steven Fishback. I'm not going to start with what I typically do and then edit it out before recording, which is like, oh my gosh, I'm nervous. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. That's typically like this first 15 to 30
if that's
seconds.
your shtick, you gotta stick with it. If that's your
I edit it out half the time though, because I'm just like, we didn't need this. But I don't know what my shtick is. Maybe I need a shtick. Maybe. And
well, my shtick is definitely I'm nervous. I don't know what to do. Like I that's definitely you're speaking to me. You're preaching to the choir on that one.
Wait, yeah, I want to talk about this. Yeah, like I want to talk about this shtick of I'm nervous, I don't know what to do, because like that's my shtick. And I'll also say I was part of this live reality game, Survivor Philadelphia. Literally, like it's I didn't mean to talk about this all now, but like literally the finale of it is going on YouTube tonight, and that is my shtick so often. And then like in life, that's my stick. Where does that come from for you? Because I don't think I know too many people who are like I don't know, I'm nervous, even though like you clearly have it together.
Well, right now I have it together in my office, with my coffee and my water, a little bit less so when there's, like in the wilderness with a stick. Yeah, you're right. It becomes like a little bit of a persona. It's like a fun, convenient, way to engage with things. Yeah, wow, you're really jumping right in. No softballs here. Like, what? Like, tell me about your personality. Like, tell me about the essence of yourself. Yeah,
that's
I do
what
think
this
like
is all about.
It's funny because like you do, before we went on, we're just talking a little bit about like the mediated mind and the idea of, how you present yourself versus how you truly are. And, there's obviously so much overlap there. And, but you also assume comfortable rhythms, like one, and I do think, part of it is a true experience for me that I'll go into a new situation and, all of the the ephemera are like coming at me hot, and I'm like trying to take it all in and like process it all. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? And part of that is from being an INTP, for those who subscribe to the Myers-Briggs personality types. So I'm someone who likes to assess all. That's called like the architect, and I am someone. I know there's a lot of people out there who are going to tell me it's junk science, and that may be true. It just happens to ring true for me, in terms of like me thinking about my own self. Like I'm someone who likes to take in all of the information, sit with it, and then like process it. I almost obsessively so. Like I need all of the information, and if I don't have all of the information, I don't feel totally comfortable making a decision, which can be debilitating at times. I do think that, so like you sort of like respond as yourself. And then because you become comfortable with those responses and how they, fit into a social dynamic, right? Like I'm used, then you just kind of default to those responses in ways when you're in that dynamic. Again, it becomes, as much as it's true, then it becomes a little bit of a performance. I mean, I do think it's heightened too, having been on reality television where, it becomes a performance that's been seen by, X number of people.
Exactly.
And then so they are expecting that of you to a certain degree. So again, like it's not me, it's just me, but in a very like smooth groove, in like a rhythm that like I'm familiar with. Does that sound like accurate for you?
No, I relate to that so much. I'm an INFP, and it's interesting because I could and even in your explanation, I could very much see that the thinking versus the feeling being like one of the big differences there, even though I am very much with some of these assessments like on the border or on the line. But yeah, it's interesting, and it relates to kind of how I look, not even how I look at the world, but how I show up, even just being on podcasts. It's like, you're out there and you're projecting something. And I think part of also what is interesting is that like, it's totally fine for you to be like, I don't know, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what's going on, especially in a world where like, you are a know-it-all. You know it all. So you know everything. What don't you know?
Well, it's funny, I do think there's an element too, though, of, you sort of are, kind of like predisposing yourself to having certain experiences of the world. This may or may not be tangentially related. I was watching an interview or I was watching a YouTube clip about Austin Butler. Is that his name? The guy who just portrayed Elvis in the Elvis
that
biopic.
Sounds familiar.
Let's say his name is Austin Butler.
We'll go, Austin
whether or not
Butler.
I think it is, and if it's not, for the purpose of this anecdote. Yeah. And it showed him in interviews before he played Elvis and after he played Elvis, like his voice and his mannerisms. And before he played Elvis, he was like, "Hey, I'm so excited to be here. What's going on?" Like just like leaning in, chattery, a little bit higher pitched in his timbre in the tone of his voice. And then after he played Elvis, suddenly he's like, "Hey, thank you for coming." There's like leaning back. He's really like, some of it is clearly, whether he subconsciously adopted some of Elvis's mannerisms or he, really consciously mimicked them. His voice went into a deeper register. His posture became more relaxed, became more leaning back. And, it totally changes how you perceive him. And again, like, we're all just sort of, falling into our patterns in terms of how we relate to other people. But it really, you think like, well, now he's like this, like, he becomes less approachable, but he also becomes like more of a star. He becomes like, who's this like mysterious person who I have to lean into? And actually, speaking of the Survivor connection, Andrew Savage on, Andrew, who Andrew Savage is? On Survivor Second Chances. He would like always lean back and he'd speak very quietly in this very low voice, and it forces you as his, in conversation with him to lean in, to like listen closely. And it's like, I remember having interviews about it. Like, it really, like, it's such like a dominance move, you know, like, I'm leaning back and I can barely be bothered to raise my voice. Anyway, well, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely interesting to me. And it's interesting because I think that I'm amazed at how effective how we choose to communicate can be in portraying something. Like, I've always been someone, and increasingly want to be someone who's projecting this and the warmth and not intimidating, or not someone who is approachable in that way. And so, there's a difference between this register and this register. Like, we have to go here. We're gonna talk about this issue, and like, honest, and there's a big difference, but it's amazing. And I love how you think about these things. And I'm kind of curious, like, because we'll bounce around a little bit, but I'm so curious if that, like, when this type of, when your brain developed essentially into what it is now, where you're like, I think about these things and these dynamics. I know, as a viewer of and super fan of Survivor, and as fans of Survivor, and as people like you in particular, as someone who talks about it and breaks it down, we're in a position to like break down what's happening and what are the dynamics and so on and so forth. But like, have you always been someone who has been interested in like these, like how people think and work and what makes people tick?
Well, definitely I've always been interested in that. I mean, I do think actually being on Survivor was sort of broadening in that respect, because I met so many people who were so hugely different from me, and I think to a certain degree, I've always been interested in dynamics and so in people's, persona. I mean, I'm an English major. I enjoy writing, and those are the things that you explore, right? Like, why does someone act the way they do? Why does someone think the way they do? What are the different, who are we? Who are people? But I do think being on Survivor, you see so many people who are so different from you, and I think I became better at kind of parsing those differences and what would lead people who just like whose values and hopes for a day are so hugely different from mine. And I think too, like, I do think there's like a world of 2022 versus a world of 2008 difference there, where like when I was growing up, and through, largely everybody or most people were, in communities of people who were largely like them, and you didn't have a huge amount of exposure to people who were outside of that. And, you could have a diverse community in some ways that was also like still had like, the way I felt. I grew up in a very diverse community, but in terms of like people's goals, in terms of like people's like expectations, in terms of like, what's the kind of jobs people wanted to have, the cities people wanted to live in, the way that they wanted their lives and their careers to be structured is very homogenous. And then, like I said, like being on Survivor, it's like people were so different in those regards, in terms of like where they wanted to be in their lives and what a day would look like and what their ambitions were for their time. And, and then you just see like, wow, like these, like, it's not, I was sort of like, awestruck by the breadth of that. I mean, and I do think too, like, just now we are so completely surrounded by other people and other perspectives, and others, and just constantly engaging through social media and
exactly
with people who are very different from us. So you are sort of forced into dialogue or conflict with people who are different from you. But it was, I mean, I think that's, partially it was just that experience. And then partially it was just time.
Yeah. And it's like really fascinating. And it makes me think about some of the questions that folks shared with me. And, kind of as we go along, I'll work these in. But, beforehand, I reached out to the RHAP podcast patrons and in one of the Facebook groups. And I said, does anyone have any questions for Steven? And I got 30 really thoughtful questions that came through too.
Oh, great.
And I'm sure you're already answering them as we go along in a way. But one of the questions that I loved, and I reference this because I just love the phrasing, is, Steven, tell us what was young Steven like before? Not that you're not still young. See, this
Well, I
is how
think
you know
I do
it's
feel
not
like
me.
I think I threw my back out a couple weeks ago. I feel like that's the sign of not being young. Like I was opening the
I mean,
freezer and I threw my back out. I think that's like the the marker that I'm no longer young.
Oh my gosh, are you okay?
I'm fine. It's fine. Just like I'm like a palimpsest of injuries.
God, but
The
young Steven, pre-Survivor in particular.
Yeah. I mean, I was super just focused on, work. And I mean, like I loved, whatever. I was like, I loved to read. Obviously I loved to, I was like a gunner in school, like I was like really good at school. I'm not like really like, and I worked hard and I, my skill set seemed to be very, matched it very well. When I, when I graduated, I wanted to go to, sort of the place where the action was. I wanted to be a part of kind of the world, and so I moved to New York. I worked in MTV in media for a while, and then I started. Well, I don't know. I feel like I'm jumping. And then I started. I was at a corporate. I was at MTV. And I noticed that. I felt like the values of MTV were not totally my values at the time.
Right.
Which was, and I was in a very pro-social. It was the pro-social department. So what I was doing at MTV was actually like very cool. It was we were using the superpowers of MTV basically for positive change. So at the time that I joined, it was 2001.
Right.
We had an anti-discrimination campaign on that was sort of like trying to educate the audience using these 15-second PSAs about topics like discrimination. We had a campaign about school violence, we had a campaign about mental health, we had a campaign about sexual health, and it was really cool. I mean, it was like very cool to be able to use the superpowers of this TV station, which at the time, MTV now I'm sure sounds like horribly outmoded, but at the time it was business was booming. Like every quarter was our biggest quarter in history, and it was great. I mean, it was really great to have that impact. At the same time, I still felt like I was part of an organization and an institution that fundamentally was calling, pop culture singers artists. And now I think that the things I think. I mean, it's so hard. This was like a long time ago. I do think the cultural divide between, pop culture and high culture and middlebrow culture, has really eroded a lot. But at the time I was like, I like literature, like what am I doing at MTV? Not that I then went on to study literature. I then went on to work in digital media and advertising, doing web design, or I was doing strategy around web design. And at the time it was like, web, like sort of like immersive web experiences were booming. And I worked for like a very, very cool little startup or not startup, but an agency in Dumbo, which at the time had like just become Dumbo, called Big Spaceship. Yeah. And then sort of started jumping into more startups and worked in a couple startups. Anyway, that was like a very long answer to your question.
No, I mean, look, Steven, this is the podcast where we interview you just to ask you about you. Like, I'm just trying to, I say we as in like, I don't think I'm multiple people. But,
the royal we.
The royal we, I guess in a way it is like we interviewing you. Cause I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone has all these other things they're curious about when it comes to Steven. And it's interesting to kind of hear the path, like that early career path for you. And also just kind of you recognizing that mismatch between who you are or who you perceived yourself as and what you perceived, where you were working as. And it's especially with like an organization that is so renowned. Like I'm sure if you told people like, oh my gosh, I work at MTV, it's like, oh my God, like tell us all about it. That's the coolest thing in the world. And I relate in a way because I mean, not in the same way. They're two very different institutions, but like for like 5 years, I worked on projects with NASA, and like I left that work in late 2020. But it's interesting because I was like, yeah, like I just don't feel like it's like what I'm doing isn't fully where I want to go in the direction I want to be in. But then you tell people that, like, oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing in the world, and it's like, but it's not me necessarily, right?
NASA may be a little cooler than MTV. I feel like
Well, yeah, I was
the
gonna
burden on
say.
you is higher than the.
I don't know. A Video Killed the Radio Star is still a great first music video. I wasn't alive at that point, but I hear
I don't want to hear
good
it.
things.
I don't want to hear it, Matt.
You're not old, Steven. You're not old, and my back hurts.
I feel very like. But it's interesting, like how much. I mean, with anything, too. It's like I feel like I bounced around a lot in terms of my various career paths and choices I've made, and to create a narrative of it after the fact is very difficult, especially, especially because, like I said, like the world has changed so much. So like the things that felt very true then are just totally irrelevant now. It's like hard to say like, oh, MTV was this behemoth. And now of course it's less so. But I do think that, and I've gone back to MTV numerous times and they've been my most persistent employer. And I think that the work that they do is just incredible. And I almost think more so now, where it's, they're less trying to chase the dragon of being the most dominant youth culture thing that exists, and more just creating, a great channel for their respective audiences. And I think that it's as a result, I feel more connected to them now. Of course, like I'm not their target audience, so that's probably bad for them that I feel connected to them.
Well, it works out. I think it's probably a good thing. You're cool. Like they want you to be in their target. Nice. Like it's like here's the audience, and then
I don't think they want me.
You're definitely on all of their slide decks about audience segmentation and all.
Exactly. It's the 18 to 25-year-old demo and this 43-year-old man.
I'm all for it. Like this is interesting because I want to even go like a little further back, and because I'm wondering, like, do you have any memory of what you wanted to be as a child as you were growing up? Was there like a dream career in mind or something? Did you have any idea of what you would be?
I think like a lot of kids abstractly, I wanted to be a writer. And it was really just through like persistence that I'm now a writer. Like I really just like, just like pure stubbornness and like refusal to, to compromise that I'm now doing that to some degree. I don't know. It's so hard. Like, I wanted to be a fireman at one point. Yeah. I guess that's why Jeremy Collins and I got along so well. But like also like, when I was a kid, my brother was going to fly an airplane, and I was excited about washing the windows on his airplane. So it's like, your dreams change over time. I do think that probably writer was the thing I was most interested in. But that just mostly meant that in college I was like super mopey and like looked out the window, longingly a lot. Not that I necessarily did a lot of writing at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting. One of the other things I think is just so amazing about you is even just I have a special admiration for writers. Like my career, my title, or my job, my profession, and I won't even go into like explain what is storyteller, and a lot of it's about narrative. It's about mostly with like video and all the above, kind of bringing that in, but still about narrative and about stories. But I was big in college and growing up on just like being that mopey person too in the window who's doing all that writing. And I'm like so curious, did you gravitate to a specific kind of writing as you did that, or were you just like, give me the poetry, fiction writing, nonfiction, all the above? What was that writing journey like for you, Steven?
Well, for a while I really wanted to be a poet. Like I really loved poetry in college. That was sort of my focus, was on poetry, both the whole, basically mostly English poetry, English American poetry, poetry in English, I guess I should say,
right,
where and up to and including contemporary poetry. So that was something that I aspired to, but didn't necessarily have the talent for. It's interesting. It's hard to. I guess poets are often young, but young novelists always dazzle me because I feel like I only now have enough like material to write about. Maybe I just had a very boring childhood, but I never didn't feel. I'm curious why you left NASA. Like, what was it about NASA that was not the right fit for you?
It's interesting. I was working at like a company working with NASA essentially to give like the short cliff notes of it. And, honestly, I like what the work that I do now is so focused on, it's like really focused around representation and identity in the climate world. So I thought to myself, like, where could I be or what could I do where I have the ability to like create something that creates space for all sorts of people to do this work. And I had some of that opportunity with NASA. I wasn't cracking codes and I don't know what they do, what the astronauts do.
I don't think cracking codes is really part of it. I
don't know.
I see why you didn't fit in there.
I watched the movie Hidden Figures, and I know it was based in like the 60s, but there were definitely some codes.
I rescind my sarcastic.
But I mean, no, you're right. You're right. I think you're right. I don't know what maybe they don't have codes anymore. See, but yeah, it's just like I think that there's something about finding a place where you are finding the opportunity to fully like just tap into your vision of what you want to create. Maybe that's like the thing of like, you could go pursue and be part of like this other vision, this NASA vision or the MTV vision, or you could kind of go and carve your own path out, which I think is fascinating. Yeah. Which kind of, no, go ahead, please.
No, and that's your more where your ambition has been, is to sort of create your own thing. That's very cool. It's hard.
And it's also, and I think the other piece is like, you also have to find ways to create the thing that like you need, but also the world needs. Because if you create something, for instance, that, you know, you're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing like this out there. Like in terms of the climate space where I work now, so much of it is providing representation and through like video stories and interviewing people who are like from underrepresented communities, right? And so that's like great for me as a young Black queer person, but also for so many people of so many identities. And so I just like, I don't know, I'm happy. I love it. And I'm like able to tap into my potential in that way. And it's funny because like it's, you know, MTV, look, if someone said to me, Matt, you could work at MTV or at NASA when I was a kid, for instance, I'm sure I would have said MTV.
Oh my God, I would have said NASA in a heartbeat. Holy cow.
See, maybe we should have swapped. We need to.
It's not too late for us to swap lives. We could do a whole, we could do a Freaky Friday situation.
We'll work on it. We'll plan it out and everything. Put it on the calendar. But I'm like, I guess like kind of going back a little bit to like this, maybe to tie it in, like this inclination you had where you're like, I'm not on the path that I want to be on with the kind of MTV stuff. And you know, obviously, and you mentioned they've been one of your most consistent employers, so shout out to MTV. But like, I guess, again, because thinking like pre-Survivor, because I'm really interested in this, like what was I don't know, where were you? Maybe the question I should ask is like, where were you when you were like cast on Survivor and actually ended up doing that experience? Because I understand that was a life-changing experience in many ways, but what was kind of like, where were you up until that point?
Yeah. So basically my trajectory from college until I was on Survivor was like kind of like working at smaller and smaller companies in the media space. Mm-hmm. So first I was at MTV. I was, at MTV proper. And then my boss at the time got the opportunity to start a new channel targeted at college students called MTVU. And I was like, take me with you. And so that was just basically, it started really just as like the two of us. And we were doing everything. Wow. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but there were very few people. And we were kind of, I was probably given more responsibility, certainly than I was comfortable with, but like than I should have had. But that was cool. We were creating kind of a TV channel from scratch, and like, what was going on the air and who were the partners. I mean, I would just call up, things that I thought were cool and be like, hey, do you want us to put you on TV? It was so great. I mean, unfortunately, my biggest miss, I don't know if you're familiar with Homestar Runner, but no. It was a big web success. So anyone listening who's familiar with Homestar Runner will understand how what a great product or a great vision that those people had. I called them, was like, listen, we just want to put your stuff on the air. We love you. And they were like, no, we're not really interested in that. We don't really want to like sell out in that way. I really think that was a mistake for them. I really think that like they should have sold out in that way. But I mean, and obviously I was sad, but kudos to them for their authenticity. But anyway, so and then I was like, I'm still in a big media corporation. I want to go even smaller. So that was when I moved to kind of the digital advertising world, where I just worked at this, really small digital design startup. And again, like this was really like when digital design startups were a new thing. There weren't a lot of them out there at the time. And mine was, I thought, the coolest. And then probably. So we were like, probably, that's right. And then I was like, I can go smaller. This company has like 20 people. That's too many. And so I then joined a startup that was launching in 2008 called Massify, and that was, basically we had not yet launched, and so I got the opportunity to help create that. And the idea was, and this was back in the day, again, so much has changed since then, but at the time there were a lot of different social networks starting. The idea was there would be a social network that would serve every one of your needs. It wouldn't be one social network, which Facebook became, that had everything. It was there were 20 social networks, and they would each serve a niche. And Massify was the idea we had was that we would connect people interested in making film from all the different, from every different discipline. So, and we would offer them tools to collaborate and work together, and then also opportunities to, to help develop their careers. So massive, it was screenwriters connecting with, directors of photography, with editors, with directors, with actors. And it was cool. I mean, we had some really interesting opportunities that, because we were, we had some big partnerships. We worked, we developed a horror movie, not a horror movie anyone wants to go out and watch. I'm not even going to name it because I'd be too embarrassed. But some writer got to pitch an idea, and then it got turned into a horror movie. And we had a band, a video. We created a music video. We had a contest to create a music video for a band at the time, and it was really the Wild West. We could just walk into a record studio and say, hey, what if we collaborate on this kind of thing? And they're scared, they're this internet thing is happening, and we don't want to get left behind. So they would then be up to do something with us. And I mean, ultimately it sold, to Lionsgate, not for billions of dollars, but it was I would say a successful exit, and now it doesn't exist anymore. As many internet startups of that era, that's the trajectory. But it was very fun. I mean, it was very cool. I certainly saw all of the abuses of privacy that internet startups or that social media startups have the potential for.
Oh my gosh, Steven, you could have stopped it all. You could have stopped all the problems.
Yeah, it's true. It was a real sliding doors moment for society.
Wait, so I'm very curious, and you've probably talked about this to some extent, but literally the moment you've obviously talked in so many different venues about Survivor, and this isn't dive into Survivor, but as you kind of went into your Survivor experience, you kind of set up part of where you were beforehand, but I one of the questions that someone asked me about specifically was in relation to you and a challenge that you were in Survivor. Someone's favorite moment in Survivor history. A challenge you're in where you're memorizing numbers, the way that people used to remember phone numbers and all the above. And someone asked, did you have other tricks like that up your sleeve? Or I'm so curious where even just a lot of those mental hacks, I guess, really have come from for you, or if you have others that you've just been hiding from us.
I'm definitely an optimizer. I mean, yes. I'm a big game player. I love to play board games. I played the game Diplomacy a lot, which I thought was excellent preparation for Survivor. And, in board games, you're always kind of, you're given a set of rules, you're given a set of constraints, and you have to find the most effective way to win given those constraints. So I'm always, I do think I'm pretty good at, trying to optimize, as long as there's no, ring tossing or slip and sliding in a challenge. I think I'm okay at the non-physical parts of the challenges, which, to be fair, a lot of physical parts of the challenges. No, but I mean, that was just lucky. I saw that there were 10 numbers or 10 digits. And then I thought back to this, thing I'd learned in my intro to psych class about how the human brain is the reason phone numbers are 10 digits is because the human brain can remember. I think it's 7 plus or minus 2 or something is what they call it, or 8 plus or minus 2. I don't remember now. At the time, I obviously remembered. And so I just converted each of the, the idea of just memorizing these symbols seemed impossible, plus divided times, you get immediately confused, but the idea of converting it into a number and then remembering the number seemed like a reasonable thing. I mean, a lot you try to everyone, right? I'm sure everyone who goes out there is thinking how do I sort of get an edge in this challenge? One thing that was cool about that was like I didn't go in and think like, oh, how do I win this thing? I went in like knowing I was going to win that challenge, and I've never felt that before in any of the other challenges I've been in, and in probably most experiences in life. I just went into that. I saw what it was, and I was like, oh, I'm going to win this. Like I was like, oh, I hope I win this, or I think I've got the skill set to win this. I just knew in advance I was going to win it, and so it almost became like, I don't know, I was like playing out the inevitable win, which, if you saw me during most of that challenge, would not have been a credible assessment, because JT was like zipping back and forth across the balance beam, and I was still digging my way out of the sand. I mean, it looked like I was far behind on TV, but in reality, I was even further behind than that. I was so far out of it that, like, I think Jeff Probst at one point was like, "Steven's totally out of it," like so. But it was so weird. Like I went in, like I knew, and sometimes I think like, how do I capture that mindset, more in my life, to the stuff that we were talking about earlier about kind of persona and the grooves you sort of fit into in your dynamic. Like, how do I become more the person who's like, I am going to win this, and therefore I will win this, as opposed to the person who's like constantly looking for the reasons that I'm going to hit the other team's target. I think not to say that I believe in manifesting necessarily, but I think there's something there. You'd watch JT's face going into some of these challenges, and like, it was like this like warrior thing like came over him. He like looked like a different human, and some like sort of like spirit descended on him that I just was like, what's going on? Like, where are we? Like, what's happening next? And it became like, and the only time truly I ever felt that I was going to win was that time that I did win.
But it's just to kind of respond to that for a second before getting into other games. I think that, there's a lot there. Like one, you could definitely kind of count yourself out and defeat yourself before going into a challenge or a game of any sort, right? And that does have an impact,
right?
And I think that there's something also there that I'm still learning, which is about how much, like, as someone who is like aware of what I project, also how exactly that projection of like the nervous, oh my God, I didn't know I was doing, how that comes across. Because like, for example, and I've been thinking about this a lot, back to my LRG experience with this Survivor Philly thing. One of the things that I think people asked me after was like, what, like, were you like, as someone who was downplaying themselves, like, was that real? Was it really
right?
I'm like, no, like I'm used to, I'm not even overwhelmed that often. I'm used to like taking on these things, or used to doing XYZ thing. But I think sometimes when you project that, it does actually affect, like when you're projecting something, it does affect how other people respond to you, which kind of, it affects what's happening around you. So there's definitely a lot, there's something interesting there.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, I mean, go ahead.
No, please.
I mean, and with the reality, I totally agree with you, and then, with the reality TV, I mean, people will often like believe the things you say about yourself, right?
Yes.
They're not independently assessing you, constantly.
Right.
So if you say I'm super confident and smart, like, well, I don't know, that sounds arrogant, but like, if you say like, oh, I've got this totally under control, someone will be like, oh, okay,
Sure.
seems like if you say, I don't know, whether or not you are more confident in that, or competent, it almost doesn't matter. And there's an element too of where that factors into reality television, where people in their confessionals who are like, I know exactly what's going on at all, and then you see, the response on social media is like, sounds like that guy knows what's going on, But if someone like me who's like, I don't know, let's see what goes on, and then they'll be like, oh, that guy's really out of it, so it almost like,
right.
Sometimes I think I need to be better at like mythologizing myself a little bit. I mean, so sort of what we were talking about, it's like so contrary to my personality, but the idea that when you say those things, people believe them about you, like, and like, I don't know. I mean, it's a pickle.
No, you do know. And there's a lot there. And that's actually something I've thought a lot about too, which is that you really, like if you want people to look at you as someone who's competent and confident, like you do need to go, even if you do need to kind of go out of your way sometimes to paint that picture for people. Just like if you're someone who's not as competent, like we often unintentionally and intentionally go out of our way to do that, paint that picture for people also. So I think that's really, there's a lot there.
I mean, I think about it a lot as, go ahead. Sorry. I didn't
please. And like, this is your time, Steven. You could jump in whenever.
I think as a writer too, there's a lot of to be said for, you see like the brooding picture, the brooding author's photo, and like this profoundly, and you see, and I see too, a lot of writers become very adept at, speaking in this almost oracular way where, they are like intoning as though they're like on like a guru on a mountain about like, the great truth of the universe. And to me, it seems so silly, but I do think there is an element where I think for writers specifically, I think people want that to a certain degree. You want the to like read the book from like the wise sage of our times.
Yeah, and
so anyone listening, I am the wise sage of our times. So you should read my stuff. Is me. I am the wise sage.
Toward the end of this interview, we'll come back to like to games and some other recommendation stuff that you have. But I want to actually just dive into all of this because I know like so much of your career journey has involved fiction writing and media consulting and speech writing and being a wise sage. Is there anything you're most proud of though so far in terms of your career when it comes to writing and again other than being a wise sage? We've established that.
Oh, well, I mean, as a so at a certain point after I kind of left the I worked at another startup that also then went on to sell, and then I started doing more speech writing and focusing on that. This because I got a lot of pleasure out of it, and it was a good way to so I think in that vein, maybe this is what you're referring to, is that as a speechwriter, my biggest client was I wrote 9 speeches about world peace that Stevie Wonder delivered at the United Nations, which was very cool. He had a concert at the UN, and it was like in favor of world peace, which I was opposed to, but he kind of really convinced me. I sort of saw that there was a better way to say. Yeah, 9 speeches about world peace is actually quite challenging because there's not really 9 things to say about world peace. There's really just the one that we're in favor of it. Like, let's do it. So it was a fun challenge. I tried to kind of relate each speech maybe to like different types of peace that we seek, peace in our neighborhoods, peace in our families, like peace, across the world, peace, from war. The other challenge to this assignment was that I heard that Stevie liked to joke about his disability, which I did not feel at all comfortable, doing. I was supposed to write a joke for Stevie about being blind, like, which was like, I don't think I am the right guy to do this. I don't think this is appropriate. And I did like ended up with like a very softball way of doing it, which was like, I was like, he like leads in, I don't know if you know this about me. I'm going to reveal something new, which not a lot of people know. I want to like share this big revelation with you. It's like, I'm blind. So I wasn't like necessarily like making a joke out of his experience, but more like sort of like the legend of Stevie Wonder,
Exactly.
But truly like writing a joke about someone else's disability was maybe the hardest, assignment I had, but so cool to be able to write a speech for Stevie Wonder. I mean, like really like that was a career highlight. That was really at the top for me.
Yeah.
And you know what? Oh, go ahead.
I don't know. No, just to like, just to comment on the joke piece of this, for instance. I mean, it's, I guess at the end of the day, like for everyone's like, oh, Stevie made that joke, but I'm gonna say, Stevie, you could make your own jokes there. Just like throw them in, poke them in, maybe like have a little spot. But I know that's tough when there's a speech being written, and then you kind of have to. But that's
the request, right? The client says like, this is what Stevie wants. I'm like, I can't be like, no, sorry, Stevie. Like that's where I draw the line. Like, and most celebrities, as do not write their own material, right? So it's like, most of these, anecdotes and speeches and things are written by somebody else. But it's cool. Like, I got to be there for the concert. I got to be there while, Stevie and the band warmed up and played and it was great. It was really, really cool. I got to be like backstage while it was happening. There's always one crisis that needs, and some emergency, like, oh, we need a last emergency speech, like this, this speech said, like, someone else said this thing, now we can't say that anymore. So there was a speech crisis. There's always like one emergency. It's like being backstage at an event, as I'm sure anyone who has produced an event knows. It's like mostly it goes pretty smoothly, but then there's always like some crisis that needs to be resolved like urgently.
Yeah. There's always something that comes up, and I'm kind of curious to hear you talk a little bit more about like the process that you've gone through. And obviously this could have been the entire podcast, but the process that you approach speech writing with, in the sense that, I mean, I think for a lot of people, like, we can imagine you sit down and okay, I have to write the Stevie Wonder speech, and it's 9 speeches, and then you do the 9 speeches, which already is tough enough. But let's say you make it past that point, and then you're like, okay, well, this other person wants a speech, and then this other one's like, okay, wait, well, this sounds a lot like me instead of sounding like them. Like, how do you go about developing a speech for somebody? Because I actually thought of that not seriously as a profession at any point, but it's like something that's really cool, is just being able to help people put their thoughts and their sentiments into words. But what's your approach with all of that?
Honestly, it does sound like a problem that one would have. I think that it is always a little bit of a back and forth, where the reason they're hiring you is because they like something the person hiring you, it does not just want to mimic, right? They don't want someone who's going to sound exactly like them. They're hiring you for like some part of your voice that they are interested in. At the same time, you're right. You don't want every speech to sound exactly alike. I abstractly, it seems like it would be more of a problem than it is. I mean, for me, I end up talking to the person a lot. You talk a lot about what the assignment is. You talk a lot just about what their values are, about what they want to communicate. And you do try to get some of their rhythms, right? You try to learn, kind of like hear it. It's like more like in your body, like you hear their speech rhythms. And it's less like he uses the word, thusly a lot. Like I better put in some thuslies. It's more like this is the way this person speaks in short cadences. This person speaks in long sweeping sentences. And then it's what's the venue, to whom are they speaking? So that obviously affects a lot what the tone of the speech is. Is it a 1 minute speech? Is it a 10-minute speech? Is it a long presentation? And so in that too will affect just kind of what the balance is. So it's never it does seem, again, like I think like abstractly it seems like this would be a real challenge, but I've never experienced that challenge.
Well, I mean, you are a Pushcart award-winning writer, which I want to ask about, because so again, referencing the people with the questions, that was on my mind. But I had a lot of people who are really big into writing circles who are like, you need to ask about this. Like, please definitely ask about the Pushcart Prize. Could you tell me about that and what it's about and why, like what role it has in writing circles? Not why you received it, Stephen. We established that.
How on earth did you get that prize?
I saw the look on your face for a second. I'm like, no, wait.
Like, why? No, I was wondering where you went with why. Like, why does it exist? Like, why did you apply?
Yeah.
So, I have been, I've got a novel that I've been writing for a while. I essentially, gosh, let me give you literally everything that's happened to me in my life as a way of answering this very narrow question.
That's all I want.
Yeah.
Everything.
I've always sort of, as I was saying, I always kind of aspired to be a writer, and I found other ways into writing. I was, when I was writing speeches, right? When I was working in advertising, I would write copy a lot. When I was working at MTV, sometimes I would write copy, I would write on-air content. And that was always something that I was passionate about and I really enjoyed, but it always felt like that kind of, I was always like scared basically to write fiction. It always seemed too holy maybe, or like too hard or something, like too much for me to tackle. I wasn't up to it. And then I truly had an epiphany experience when I was on Survivor the second time in Cambodia, where, you may have seen me get extremely sick. And I just was like violently ill. I was literally like naked in a rainstorm, like being sick, because it was pouring and it had been pouring for days. And so I didn't want to go out into the rainstorm in my clothes, because then they would be soaked. So I would have to take off all my clothes, go out into the rainstorm to be sick, and come back and put on my like damp and fortunately not totally soaking wet clothes. And I was like, this is such a low. Like, and I can do this. Like, why am I afraid of, pursuing what I really believe in? Why am I afraid of doing something that is so meaningful to me? And when I got back, I immediately started writing a novel, and I progressed on that novel. And I wrote a draft, and I wrote another draft, and I revised that in another draft. It was like fine. And I had like an agent who was interested in it and was willing to, and I had someone who wanted to publish it, but I was like, this is not as good. And I don't want the first thing that I publish. And maybe this is self-sabotaging rather than inspiring, or not inspiring, but like that rather than, maybe this is self-sabotaging rather than like an intelligent way of proceeding. But I decided I felt like I could do better and I didn't want to like lead with my, like, not necessarily my worst foot, but lead with a not great product. And so I went got an MFA from NYU, and started working on short stories, which was never something I read. Like, I did not care about short stories at all. Now I care deeply about short stories. I really tried to work with some amazing professors on kind of really honing my skill. And this short story was sort of the first short story, this short story called Two Sharks, which is somewhat based, in no way based on my experience as a former reality TV contestant, was the sort of like, the first one I really like wrote applying a lot of these techniques that I had learned in school. And it got published by this journal, One Story, which is an incredible journal that supports a lot of, first-time writers and emerging authors. And it's literally one story. If you haven't seen it, it looks like a zine, that you might staple together in a garage. It's like literally just like paper stapled together, pretty cover, and that's it.
That's all you need.
And that got, so they accepted it, and then they submitted it for the Pushcart Prize, which is a great prize that honors some of the best work that it's being published by the smaller presses. So it's not, the New Yorker, stories published in the New Yorker would not be competing against me for this. But there's something like some insane number of submissions every year. I think it was like something like 60,000 submissions every year. So very cool to have been selected for this. It's truly, you know what it does? You said, like, what does this do for you? Like, what it does is it makes the next thing easier, or slightly easier, less miserable. It's like when the next time I send out a story, I can say, hey, I want a Pushcart, and that they will be more inclined to read that story or to take it seriously, because people at these magazines who publish these stories, like, they get deluged, they get thousands of stories a month.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure, like, can you imagine like having to read and you don't know if it's going to be good or terrible? It's like so hard to know like how much to invest yourself in it, beforehand. And you're desperately looking for some reason to say, hey, this is no good, I can stop reading. So just the fact that I have that in my cover letter now, I think hopefully means they'll read to the second page rather than just the first.
Wow. And there's a lot there that's really fascinating. And just to highlight that really deep question that you brought up, like, is it self-sabotage to kind of sit on and hold on to that thing where you're like, this is good, but it's not as good as I want it to be? And I think I also have grappled with that question in different ways, but I do know on the flip side that it's, writing, just like exercise or anything else, you're developing a muscle to do it. And I think for me with writing, where I've realized that most is that in college, I took so many creative writing classes as electives, especially with poetry writing, but there was dramatic writing, there was just a lot of different types of writing, because I gravitated to that, and I could just spit it out so quick. And then
I'm so envious. It's so cool.
Over time, it just kind of got to a point, like, even now I'm like, oh my gosh, like picking up a pen and writing something is such a challenge. And I actually think about, for myself, this one reason that this conversation is interesting, and just talking with you is interesting, is that like I would love, and I'm sure a lot of people out there like have a book or a story in them that they'd want to tell, but I don't know if I wouldn't simplify it and call it fear or anything like that, but there's definitely there are barriers to folks to actually go about doing it and just creating that book or short story or whatever it might be. And I have to ask you, as the wise sage of this podcast,
the wise sage of our era, I believe.
Of our era. Oh, sorry.
Well, I can't remember.
I mean, also of the podcast. I mean, yeah, I guess that's not that
the
much.
The podcast as like being contained within the world. Yes.
Yes. But like, well, yeah. What's like your I don't know. Do you have any tips for people to actually like write that book that's in them? Because like you might not ever have the chance to write it, unfortunately.
That's
or publish it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. And I think it's a fear that so many of us have. And I think you get at the heart of sort of why I was struggling with my novel versus why, I did better with my story, where the novel for me still represented this, huge thing that was like the story I needed to tell. And I had to get this into the world. And there was so much pressure around it and so much just like misery that I felt like I was, grinding out every single word. The story, I mean, almost because I didn't particularly care for stories at the time, I was like, you know what, let's just see. Let's see what happens. Let me have fun. Like, I'm just going to write this. It doesn't have to go anywhere. I'll do the things that, I'll try out the techniques I want to try out. I'll put in things that maybe I shouldn't put in, but like, we'll see, we'll see if it's any good. And that level of experimentation and play for me was totally liberating, where I felt like I'm just having fun. I'm trying to amuse myself. I'm trying to trying this out. And now I try to do that with everything I write, where, try to forget that this hopefully will be published somewhere, that this will hopefully be part of some other thing, that this will hopefully make it just like to have fun with it and like do the things that I enjoy and the things that make me laugh and add in the scenes that I think are really funny. And I mean, so far that seems to be decently successful, but I do think that, it's so hard to write when you feel that enormous pressure of where is this going? What does this mean for the world? What does this mean for me in my life? I mean, I don't know. So it sounds like you, were extremely productive when you were. I mean, what do you think has changed for you since the time that you were really prolific versus now when it's a little bit harder?
I mean, I think part of it's just a shift in terms of interest in some ways. Like, but for me, it was really poetry writing that I gravitated to, and I think part of it, there's just so much emotion that I felt able to like tap into just to like pump something out, and then the words accompanied the emotion, and then my thought process was able to create that. I mean, one of the things I'll say that's very tangible is having a community of people that you're surrounded by who are also writing and okay with not being perfect and just creating, and you have like I guess this isn't how parents think of kids, but I'll use the analogy of like you have like the babies in your writing that you love, and like the ones that you maybe don't love as much, but like you try and you put it out there, and like maybe you won't think about this is not.
What do you do to the babies? You just like throw the babies you don't love away?
I think this is a dark analogy if we keep going with the babies.
No, but I think you're right. I agree with you. I think the idea that you're being part of a community where everyone acknowledges that things are flawed, I think is so important. I think you're exactly right. Like just the idea of I need to create some perfect thing and like that's an expression of my value as a human being is debilitating. But and that you're right. Like once you're with other writers and other artists, like they all know it's going to suck the first time, there's going to be flaws, and accepting that that's normal, that it's normal to have flaws, that it's not embarrassing to have flaws, that it's, totally expected, that it's not going to be perfect the first time. I totally agree with you, is the most liberating thing you can do.
And I could tell you, I guess I given the 30 seconds to process it, I mean, what happens with the babies is that they're still there, and maybe they'll grow and develop, but maybe you'll come back to them and give them more time and attention later, but so they're still there and they still inform your process. Like maybe you look and you're like, okay, that wasn't great, but there are elements of that. There were seeds of something there that ultimately, by the way, I interviewed Jordan Kalish for last week's episode, and seeds baby is this thing. So maybe there's a connection here between the seeds, but there's seeds of something that maybe you could kind of go back to and water more in the future. And actually, I'll say, like, the thing that I relate your kind of journey with just writing a novel to more is a few years ago in 2019 I filmed. I didn't know what I was doing, but I like filmed this documentary interviewing people in San Francisco, 20s and change San Francisco, in case anyone wants to check it out. But I filmed it, and it was like deeply personal in the sense that I'm interviewing change makers. It's about identity, like just a lot of like raw conversations, and I wanted it to be perfect. And I actually, and I ended up ultimately releasing it in like just putting it on YouTube in like early 2021, I think, because I was just like, I need to get this out there and put it out there. But what has happened since doing that, one, is that I kind of see that for what it was, as like a step in my creative journey, but letting that go, letting that baby go, Steven, it really like gave me space to create a lot more stuff that I'm able to develop and put out there. And so sometimes it's just like you have to let it go, and then you start from scratch and you keep going. And the other thing though with you is that whatever you put out there, like, there are going to be tons of people who are supportive, even just in like knowing of you. And so,
well, it's very nice. It's very nice to say. I mean, it's pretty. It is great how what an incredible community, you know, the whole RHAP community has been. I mean, I you know, whatever Rob did, whatever like demon Rob sacrificed to or continues to sacrifice to, maybe there's maybe there's babies that he threw away before his two, you know, to create this community.
There were babies back. That there are, and I love when hearing Rob talk about just some of his journey with creating. Like, look, all I'm gonna say is that there was a show that I remember watching when I was way too young to watch it, called Kill Reality on the E! Network, and there you can't find it anywhere.
Is that true?
Maybe it's on like a DVD or maybe a VHS at Rob's house. Yeah. I'll get it. Rob, if you're listening to this, please send me a copy of Kill. I've been wanting to watch that back for about probably 20 years since it came out or whatever. But you know, like you need to kind of let go sometimes of those things, just so that you're like, well, now what do I do?
Right. Yeah.
What's next?
100%. I think you're absolutely right about that. You know, you got to create the thing, and then you move on to the next thing, and the next thing is going to be better. And I think that's a lot of writers, they have, you know, what they call like a desk drawer novel, right? Their first novel was just, you know, them basically teaching themselves how to write a novel. And so they sort of like write it. They're like, oh, this is, you know, never, you know, maybe someday I'll return to this. And then they, but they put it away, and then they move on to the next one. And the second novel is often the debut novel. The first one was just sort of an insolvable problem for them. And I still am committed to this first novel. I just am not, again, like too stubborn to give up on this first novel. But at some point I will release it. But really, you know, it's but I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. Who are the poets who inspire you? You know, who are the poets who, you know, that sort of led you to want to write poetry?
That's so interesting. And honestly, I don't even, at this point, I feel so disconnected from my poetry journey. And it's interesting because for me, it's a lot of it, you know, like I remember being exposed to a lot of more like popular mainstream poets and like iconic people over time. But really, the people who jumped out to me, like there's one author and poet who I love, who's actually, I think she's still DC based, Liz Acevedo or Elizabeth Acevedo, who just like, she's only a few years older than me. She went to George Washington University, GW, like I did. And I met her before she'd published a number of her books. And she's like, I'll be in bookstores and airports or wherever, and I'll just see her book wherever it is, all over the place. And so, or some of her books, because she might have 4 or 5 published by this point. And for me, it was hearing how she translated her story and experience into spoken word at the time, and then ultimately how she's doing that with novels, that really jumped out to me. And you know, maybe part of what was so powerful with her in particular, in my case, was like literally this was someone that I met, you know, and she was already starting to climb and performing everywhere when I met her and when I became aware of her, but just seeing how accessible writing and poetry writing were. I think that's what really pushed me. She's the one
cool
person who comes to mind.
Yeah.
But who inspired you? And I'm curious in that if that ties in with any favorite books or literature that you look to.
I mean, God, so many.
Sure.
It's who inspired me versus, I think with all of us, right? When we all are a lot of, anyone who has an ambition to write loved books as a kid, probably, or for the most part, that's true. I was an avid reader, of course, right? I loved to read books about the miniature knight that lives in some boy's castle, or like the secret vampire best friend, or just like the sort of like or like the secret powers that someone developed, and the pre-Harry Potter, these were the bleak pre-Harry Potter days, so there's no a lot fewer secret powers back then. Now it's like every book has got secret powers in it, but I really had to find my loved the Chronicles of Narnia. I know I didn't like the Chronicles of Narnia. No, sorry, I didn't mean that. Well, the Lloyd, it's fine. The Chronicles of Narnia are fine. I mean, they're great for a kid, but like, I never really got into it, and now they're just like so tedious. My God. But the Lloyd Alexander's books, the Prydain, I guess is what I was going for, and then Lord of the Rings, obviously, just love that stuff. But now it's more. I mean, Charles Dickens is maybe my favorite author now. He's just so funny, so antic, so like wild in his creativity. It's like whenever you ask someone their favorite authors, like it's like Karen Russell. I don't know if you know her. She's a story writer. She writes novels as well. Someone whose work really consistently inspires me. God, there's so many. Adam Johnson is another writer whom I love. Jim Shepard. I mean, Colson Whitehead obviously is just like incredible, and so incredible on the sentence with sentences, and I mean, just real like looking at my books here, trying to like figure out who there's so many. That's just a few. It was an incredible book for those of us who are interested in jungle themed books. Is State of Wonder by Ann Patchett is really an amazing book, and I just I've read that. I'll just pick that up and like leaf through it to be reminded of like what great writing is, because she's just amazing.
That's the other point though too. I think that really is key, is that you really need to. Oh, that's not even about writing, but just I think about being good or effective at anything is like you need to also be a consumer, or I think maybe for the most part you need to be someone who's consuming, like you reading people's work, like developing that list of like authors that you admire. Like Steven, I'm almost nervous for you with how many books there are, because like if there's an earthquake, they're just going to fall on you. Have so many, and
you might not be Washington now, no longer in Los Angeles.
Exactly. But you never know. We had one of those about 10 years ago or so while I was still in the city. So all to say though that like there's if you have any others to recommend, that's I think it's always great. But I just love that idea of, you could become a better podcaster, like listen to podcasters, tune in, like listen to the Paraphrase podcast and what Steven's up to. And then you also have like a lot of really incredible people on who, maybe aren't at the point where, they're in this like, a lot of them are iconic, but like people aren't necessarily at the point where it's like, let me talk about this person as inspiration. But like there are a lot of real world people today who are making great things and could be powerful inspirations.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, a bunch of the people I listed are contemporary, and a friend of mine actually, as a writer whom I absolutely love, whose book, her name is Namwali Serpal, and she's got a book coming out next week. So I'll let me plug that. It's called The Furrows. It's getting amazing pre-publicity or pre-publication publicity, and the reviews have been extraordinary. It comes out, I believe a week from today. So it's can't recommend it enough. She wrote The Old Drift, which was published a couple years ago. For my devoted Paraphrase podcast fans, I interviewed her at that time. But that's, if you're looking for a great book, it sounds amazing. It's an exploration of grief and truly like the reviews of this book have been extraordinary.
Yeah, and it sounds like even just hearing your exploration or explanation of the exploration. Ooh, I'm gonna save that for something. But yeah, just hearing your explanation of the explorations, like there's so many different themes, and I even feel like this with pod friends or with storytelling overall, is that there's so many themes that that obviously themes that people, that's why they're themes, because like they're overarching things that people relate to and relate within. But like that sounds really powerful, and I'm so curious to check it out and to see what I glean from it about grief and whatever else is happening. And check out the furrows. What do you say the author's name is again?
Namwali Serpell.
Namwali.
That's Namwali. Namwali.
Awesome. So, Stephen, there's so many different questions I have for you. We could be here forever. One thing I want to ask you, though, is about just like the first of all, Paraphrase podcast. Like, was it for you? For you
to know about Paraphrase podcast?
Well, yeah. I'm like, tell me. So, like, what was there? We've talked about a lot within the creative process of how you kind of have thought of things and approach things, but I'm curious, even just like where starting that and creating that has fit in for you, and like was because I'm seeing like a little bit of a theme of like, this thing that I do makes me better at what I do. Like, I'm curious though, what role that podcast has played for you.
I mean, Matt, honestly, it's sort of similar to what you were talking about earlier, where you see, you want something to exist in the world, and so you go and make it. Where I was looking for a podcast that kind of did a breakdown of books on, there's a lot of literary podcasts that sort of talk about the sweeping themes of books and, why the writer decided to write this book. But I was looking for a podcast that really spoke on a craft level about a book in the way that Rishi Hirway's podcast Song Exploder talked about songs. And I was like, why isn't there a book exploder? Well, now actually there is a book exploder as of a couple of weeks ago, but at the time when I started Paraphrase, there was not. So Rishi recently launched Book Exploder, which sort of has actually sapped my desire to do more paraphrases. But no. I mean, it's a good thing. Like, so I was like, I want a podcast that breaks down, the craft choices on like a paragraph level, where it's not just here's the sweeping themes of the book, and it's not here's how to write a great sentence. It's what is the balance that creates, because to me that's right. Like that's like the unit of, I mean, of course you read a sentence and you read a book, like those are also units of information, but the paragraph as a writer is like kind of how I think of shaping. And so I wanted someone who was really breaking down what, how they did that, why is your quote, is this quote here? Why is this line here? What were you thinking of when you made that image? Initially I started with just my first few trials of this podcast were just me picking a favorite paragraph that I liked at anywhere in the book. And that's actually, I think, what Book Exploder is doing. I found that it was too hard just for me to give the context of, so at this point in the book, 300 pages in, here's what's going on at this point. So I started just doing the first paragraph of a book, which is a lot easier because, first of all, there's no context, and you're coming to it totally fresh. Also because writers will often labor over that first paragraph the most, whereas I found in my early interviews about, random paragraphs in the middle, they'd be like, it sounded like they were almost making up after the fact justifications for why they made certain choices, whereas it was not totally conscious. Whereas with the first paragraph, people really labor over, what is the scene I am setting? How am I introducing characters? What is the tone that I'm creating? So I started focusing on that. And it's been really great. I mean, it's been very interesting. What's cool is, the responses have ranged from, Jeff Vandermeer talking about how his opening to Annihilation, which is one of my favorite books, came to him literally in a dream. He like literally had a dream and he got up and wrote it down, and like that became the opening of his book. And then you've got someone like Teddy Wayne, who's another writer I love, who, every sentence, is so meticulous. Like it's so deliberate. Well, the reason like I have that comma there is because if I had it over here, and so it's just And in some ways, I actually found that maybe the big lesson of Paraphrase for me has been, people come at the creative process from so many different ways, and there's no right way to do it. There's no correct path to like choosing your introduction. Everyone is sort of, figuring it out for themselves based on their own creative intuition.
Yeah. Wow. And there's a lot there. And I think that what's amazing about creating anything is that there are so many different ways that you create. There's writing, there's video and filmmaking, for instance, there's podcasting as an example, which kind of brings me to RHAP as a podcast and the community, because I would love to know, like, just from your perspective, not to get sappy and everything now, but who knows? I have room for sappiness here too. Like, I'm curious about what role the RHAP has a podcast community has kind of played for you in your journey. Just because it's you're one of the people who you've been around it for, I mean, like, I guess like basically since it started in a way, right?
Screw those jerks. No, no, I feel so fortunate and so lucky to be a part of the RHAP as a podcast community. I mean, it's such an incredible, warm, welcoming, fun, enthusiastic group of people. I miss so much going to the live events and getting to interact. And I've been like super paranoid. I mean, the COVID really put a damper on it for everybody, and I'm still not at the point where I'm comfortable going back to those things. But really, like, those were always the highlights of my year. It was just like the positivity and the energy and the love from everyone. And we're all kind of geeking out about Survivor, but in a way, like, Survivor's almost, it's like Survivors just happens to be the theme, but it's like the community. Here's what, like, when we first started doing the live know-it-alls, people were coming to listen to our podcast, and then afterwards they'd hang out. Like they were there for the podcast, and then afterwards we'd like all go to a bar and they'd all hang out. Now people are coming to hang out, and like they have to listen to a podcast first, and I think that is so cool. It's like like the podcast has become just sort of the impetus for the bigger social engagement rather than like the reason people are there. I mean, obviously, like, it's like the reason, but you know what I'm saying? It's like the community is become like so much bigger than the podcasts themselves. And like the podcasts are like the anchor points for that community to come together and to, for friends to see each other, for a gathering of people to take place. And I just love that. And it's been such a magical thing to have like some, tangential relationship with. And I love, it really is like one of the best parts of my life. And that is, speaking of sappy, like, and I love it when like, someone will come up on the street and say like, oh my God, I listened to RHAP as a podcast. I'm like, and there's like an instant communion with that person, like they are like part of this group that I feel like I'm, a part of as well. And it's just such a positive, great, supportive, group of people. And I've only, I don't know. I can't like totally express on the spot just how extremely grateful I am and how much I've loved it, and how I I don't know, it's been really wonderful and magical and lovely. And I don't know, it's like I don't really know any big groups that are so uniformly, and I'm sure that's not uniform, I'm sure there's but from my perspective, like it's really like kind and positive and fun and just it's been and RHAP only had to sacrifice one child to the devil in order to create this, and I think it's worth it. Well worth it. Yeah. Dominic will be fine. It's cool. Yeah, he's still going. Yeah. But I have to ask, because someone put this out there. I'm like, oh, this is an interesting question. Like, you've been podcasting with RHAP for so many years now, and curious if there's a particular podcast or live event memory or story that kind of jumps out to you that listeners might not be aware of, some of that behind the scenes exclusive information. This is not going to be, I don't have any great behind the scenes exclusive information. I mean, the thing I will say is that Rob is like hanging out with him before the show and during the show he is so fixated on getting everything right. Like that man is just like 100%. Like he is hardworking, like dedicated to his craft. You know, like you hear about like Probst being, you know, so fixated on every like every little detail of Survivor. I feel like that is Rob with the podcast.
Yeah.
And just really, really passionate and really, really dedicated, you know, to almost excited, you know, and I always feel like a passenger, you know, I just like swan in there and like, yeah, everybody, what's going on? And Rob is just like, you know, miserable with all the anxiety of like making sure that every like AV thing has been sorted out and, you know, people are happy. And, no, I don't think he's miserable. I think he has a lot of fun, but
well,
I mean,
no,
you know,
I don't. Yeah,
is like he's, you know, he's really,
there's a lot. He's the like literally he's Rob Has a Podcast. There's a lot that he has to consider, a lot of weight to that too. But yeah, there's a lot of work there. Not to cut you off, but just to recognize that I don't want the breaking news to be the breaking news isn't Rob is miserable, right? But no, yes,
no, but I mean it's amazing. I mean, it really is amazing. I mean, I do feel like it's like one of the great gifts of my life to like be a part of this community. It's just yeah, it's like where else do you find such like a supportive, you know, group of people who are all and the Survivor thing is cool. You know, it's like the fact that it's around Survivor is interesting because it's like a subject that's so variable, so fascinating. I mean, I know that there's other shows as well that are you know, but like for me, it's around Survivor, you know, where it's Survivor's a show that's about human nature, you know, it's about all of the different personality types and how they come together, and it's also about games, which I love too. You know, I love studying human nature and I love games, and it's about how do you and the confluence and conflict between those things, like how do these messy, you know, hungry, crazy people, you know, play this infinitely complex game that's constantly, you know, changing, and sometimes changing too much and in too irritating ways. But, you know, it's, you know, where like, how do they, you know, and the discussion of that and the analysis of that and the exploration of that as a kind of like form of a community coming together is so interesting and so fascinating. It's like that's what I want to talk about, you know. It's crazy that like there's a whole group, you know, of thousands of other people who want to talk about the same thing. I just love that.
Yeah, and I mean, especially in a world where, like, you know, sometimes what you get with Survivor is like, what? That show's still on the air? Or like, what? People lying and scheming and like, not even, I wouldn't even add in plotting because there's not even a recognition sometimes from people of like the value of Survivor. And I love Survivor for the reasons you mentioned. I also think it's incredibly fascinating to see how, like, to recognize that each and every season, it changes how players are going to play in the future, and so there's an evolution to it along the way beyond the twists and everything else. But Steven, we could be here forever, we could be talking on Pod Friends forever, but I know I have to let you go. We have to go soon. We can't just be here forever. I need to ask though, because we have been talking about, you know, your story, we've been talking about narrative and all of the above, but I want to ask, Steven, if your life were a book or a documentary, what would the title be and why?
So, I mean, you mentioned this as a potential question, which, by the way, like, I don't mean to out you. Like, I also send my questions in advance because, like, you know, if you want someone to have a thoughtful answer, you know, it's, you know, on a podcast, you know, you can't just, you know, out of the blue, you know, like ask them a question that's, you know, requires thought. So
do you have a list, like a top 10 list, or
no? But you know, I don't feel like my life until this point has like necessarily. Like, I'm not ready for that like big. So I'm gonna say, you know, a biography of me up until this point. Let's just say like, let's hope it gets better than this. You know, let's hope there's more to come. Yeah, let's hope it gets better than this is what I want. Because you know, I think that I'm really excited about where I am right now in terms of like finally starting to fulfill the things that I've always wanted from my life. You know, I mean, in terms of like the writing, feeling like it's just kind of getting going, where I finally feel like I'm writing things that I'm proud of. And I'm finally getting, you know, able to like reach out to magazines and, you know, they'll write back. Sometimes with or I'll, you know, frequently, most of the time with rejections, but you know, the rejections are getting nicer and nicer. So I feel like I'm, you know, just kind of where I want to be in that world. You know, I'm really happy in my home, you know, and so I feel like I feel like the future for me is where I'm most excited, where as opposed to actually feeling like I've accomplished the things I want to in the past. So let's hope it gets better than this.
Wow, let's hope it gets better than this.
Yeah.
Let's hope. And on the topic of, well, let's just say this: departing from the deep topics about your life and all the things, it's good to take a break sometimes. It's good to step back to play some games. I want to know, Steven, do you have like games that you love most, whether board games, card games, party games, whatever? Just because I'm looking for some play.
I mean, I love, as I mentioned, I love Diplomacy. That's like a long-standing favorite of mine. I love RPGs. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I like Call of Cthulhu. I've got I don't know. It's it's similar. Like whenever you ask these questions, you get these questions. Like I don't know what games. I like the variety. One of the cool things about our era is just how many awesome board games are being released, and they have interesting mechanics and interesting ways of play. And when I was in New York, and I don't have this yet here, I had a regular gaming group, and we would play every couple weeks and just try new things, and it was always a thrill, and I miss that. But like I like just the variety of different games.
That's awesome. Look, Steven, we'll figure it out. We'll set up the gaming group just for you. We'll all of the above, all of it. But you're amazing.
You're amazing, Matt. This is great. You're a fantastic
amazing
interviewer. You're really, really good. You both like share your own stories and express your own vulnerability, but you also, I feel like whenever, you're so good at like getting to the heart of a question. I'll be like rambling for, 10 minutes, and you'll say the core emotional component of what you just said is this. And you'll be like, oh, I was like, wow.
We could have been here for 10 hours though, probably doing that. So it's tough.
You're great at this, Matt. You're really, really good. It's really a pleasure to be here.
It's like part of it. Thank you so much, Stephen. It means a lot, especially coming from you. And, I think at the end of the day, it's like, if you're doing what you love and what you enjoy, it's a lot easier, at least for me. It's a lot easier to be deeply engaged and having a good time, and maybe even better at it because there's practice and everything else. And so this is phenomenal, but I have to thank you. And just any closing words for the people? They love that.
I mean, let's hope it gets better than this, man. No, sorry.
No, that's good. That works. That's fine. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of Pod Friends. And as we wrap up, I have some very special stuff to share with you, and stay tuned as the outro goes on, because you might see we have a few more minutes left and remaining, and one of the things you'll hear is a really incredible voicemail, as well as a little bit of an excerpt of a conversation from me and Isaiah Goins, who was on the previous episode of Pod Friends, talking about something that we're part of in this Survivor adjacent community, Survivor Philadelphia Head vs. Heart, created by the one and only Alex Gardner. Shout out to Alex Gardner for creating that connection and that community around Survivor and Survivor games, and a place to build bonds. And I'm excited for folks to hear what is coming up. Before diving into some voicemails and some other special stuff with Isaiah, I just want to give a little big thanks to a bunch of people. So I'm going to list out a bunch of names, but I want to thank those who left a voicemail. So Mark Levy, who you heard at the start of the episode, but also want to give a big shout out to Josh, to Ryan, to Holly, to Dan, you'll hear in a second, and of course to everyone who left a question for Steven, whether or not it made it into the conversation. Just want to shout you all out for even attempting to be part of this. Joshua, Ariel, Shayna, Gwen, Joy, Sarah, Krista, other Sarah, Mike, Gary, David, Amy, Tom, Ivan, Lyric, Mackenzie, Brian, Grace, Cindy, Mike, Daniel, Jake, Eliza, Seth, Zach, Danish, Weston, all of you, thank you so much for being part of this episode. And without further ado, here are some voicemails.
At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
What's going on, everybody? It's Josh Green calling in. Want to highlight the great Shannon Gus with her episode on Season 2 of Pod Friends. I thought, obviously Shannon is phenomenal with everything that she does for the survivor community. But I loved getting to know her more as a fellow Jew. Being able to hear her talk about her religious identity was very powerful to hear, and you know, just her mental health journey as well. Shannon and I have both lost someone to dementia and Alzheimer's, and it is absolutely horrible. And it's something that is really difficult to deal with. So I just really took a lot away from Shannon, and hearing that, she's on a great path, and that she is such an amazing partner in Peter to help her in life. And I just loved hearing more about people's personal lives who I listen to on a regular weekly basis. And for all of you pod friends out there, stay well and stay happy.
Hi, Matt. This is Ryan. I wanted to leave some feedback for you. I wanted to say thank you for all that you're doing, first off. I think it's extremely important to kind of hear people's stories as a way to get to know them. I think it's strengthening the RHAP community as a whole. And I know that you're passionate about this. I can tell that you're passionate about this. I think everyone who listens can. And I just wanted to say that it's not going unnoticed, and thank you so much for doing that. I also appreciate the willingness to go out of the scope of traditional RHAP. I'm thinking the Greg podcast specifically. I think it's really important to just hear people's voices and give them a chance to tell their story. And that goes for everybody in the community. Specifically, I wanted to take a moment to thank you for something you did in season 1, which we've briefly talked about, actually, regarding the shout out to Sean Tucker. He was somebody who was in the RHAP community who passed away about 7 months ago. Good friend of mine, but I appreciated you shouting him out and just looping it into the general theme of the RHAP community, because I do think that's important. There is such a community here, and you're strengthening it. And I think that's really the core of what this podcast is, in my opinion. Everyone else could have other interpretations of it. But I just want to say thank you for doing that. And I hope you continue to find great people to talk to. And I have confidence that you will. And it does not go unnoticed among the fans. So thank you again for doing all that you do. And I can't wait to listen to more podcasts.
Hi, Matt. My name is Holly. I am leaving you a voicemail today because you asked me to, and I'm manifesting that for you. Chantal would be so proud. I am also leaving you a voicemail because I am an OG listener of Pod Friends, and I wanted to let you know how much I appreciate the job that you do. The questions that you ask and the way you're able to bring out information in your guests, the stories they share, and all that they share about their personal lives is not only entertaining, but it's enlightening and impactful. I might just be one listener, but I know that you're impacting hundreds, if not thousands, of others directly or indirectly. So today I wanted to leave a voicemail and just send some grace your way. Thanks for all that you do. Take care.
Hi, Matt. This is Dan Sinensky, day one listener of Pod Friends. So, after every episode, I end up feeling more connected with each guest. And that's huge, right? Because some guests, I come into the episode already feeling connected to them. And some guests, I don't really know that much about them, or I might feel disconnected from them. But there's always something that I'm able to connect to the guest about. And I walk away with some sort of appreciation or understanding of them. And I think that's huge. So thank you for that. I always look forward to the episode, whether it's a guest that I feel great about or it's someone who I'm unsure about, because I know I'll, by the end of the episode, have a new approach. Looking forward to the next episode. Take care.
Wow. I just want to send so much love to all of them, and anyone who wants to leave a voicemail at speakpipe.com/podfringe, just because those really hit me. And I think in the moments where you get caught up sometimes in like, okay, I need to record this thing and then put it out there and do all this thing. And like, these are the conversations we could have on Podfriends, the meta conversations about podcasting. It's so nice to be able to hear from people and hear from you all. Like you, yes, you, because literally those of you who are hearing the sound of my voice right now, who are listening right now, like you are what's so special about Podfriends. And I know that everyone's at a different point wherever they are, but I just want you to know that you are not too small. You are not insignificant. Like over the course of this Survivor season, if I'm at any events, I want you to know that you matter and I want to hear from you. And again, voicemails are a great way to do that. And even in the Podfriends off season, I hope to be able to check those out. So again, speakpipe.com/podfriends. Leave a voicemail of something that lands with you, what you think about this podcast, why it matters. And I will definitely be listening. But you know, so much of Podfriends is about community, and I just want to leave you with a conversation I had with Isaiah Goins, a podcaster and a guest of Podfriends from a couple weeks back. Isaiah is the creator of Silent Podcasts and also was part of Survivor Philadelphia Head vs. Heart, which is available on YouTube at bit.ly/SurvivorHVH. That's bit.ly/SurvivorHVH. And if you check it out, subscribe to the YouTube channel, watch the season. It's all out there. All 10 episodes have been out there. The finale is aired. And I was so thankful to be part of the season along with Isaiah. And, you know, really, I value the role that even playing that game played for me in bonding with this community, because I hadn't been to any live shows or live events before Survivor Philadelphia. And I've never played any games like that before Survivor Philadelphia and since Survivor Philadelphia. And so I talk with Isaiah and ask him really about why people should be part of it or what people should know if they're interested in getting involved in the community. If you know me, you know that I can't encourage getting involved with the community enough. So I hope that you enjoy this closing conversation with Isaiah about Survivor Philadelphia Head vs. Heart. And, you know, as we wrap up, I just also want to say to each and every one of you, I love you. I appreciate you. Get in touch at MattScotchEW. Get in touch at HeyPodFriends on Twitter. And email me, podfriends@robhaswebsite.com. And of course, just want to give a special thanks to everyone on the RHAP is a Podcast team. You know who you are. I shout you out each and every week and just want to thank you for making this possible. And now, my conversation about one way that you could get even more deeply involved in the community with the one and only Isaiah 8-Ball Goins. So Isaiah, we just last week, as people listen, this last week was the finale of Survivor Philadelphia, Head vs. Heart. We both played it. As people might know, well, there are going to be spoilers ahead here, so like check it out if you want. Go on YouTube, search for Survivor Philadelphia, watch if you don't be spoiled. We made it to the end. We lost.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
You know, I was really salty for a long time.
It has been a year. I just want to point it out.
Yeah, but you know, I'm content.
So if someone's listening and they're like, ooh, should I play the game? Like, what would you say to someone who is listening now about the game? Would you like encourage them to play it? Do you have any advice for them that you'd want to give?
Yeah, just don't get me bored on TV. Play it. Like I don't want to see 10 episodes of people standing around being like, oh, what we're gonna do?
Okay,
you know, like come on now. I think our season was correct because we had a whole bunch of people who wanted to play and they wanted to play hard. Was it the best strategy? Absolutely not. But look, everyone tried to win, and it was a fun time.
But you know what? It's good to be in the third place club. I will say, next to Rob Cesternino and Xander Hastings. Like I'm in good company of good strategists who know what they're doing. So I'm just letting you know. Isaiah, any final Survivor Philadelphia words? A word? Anything you want to plug even to?
Black people audition.